Daf Yomi, Tractate Zevachim, page 111, Kuf Yud Aleph, Amud Aleph on the top of the page, with the words Bekir Bo Nisachim Bimidbar Pligi. Bikarvu Nisachim Bimidbar Pligi. They disagree with regard to whether one is liable for pouring a libation outside the courtyard that was not first consecrated in a service vessel. This dispute is based on a disagreement with regard to whether wine libations were offered in the tabernacle, in the wilderness, before the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara will soon explain the logical connection between the two issues. Ravina Amar, Ravina said, everyone agrees that wine libations are valid even if they are not first consecrated in a sacred service vessel. Therefore, one who pours a wine libation outside the courtyard is liable even if it was not first consecrated in a service vessel. They disagree with regard to whether the liability for pouring a water libation can be derived from that of a wine libation. The first Tana holds that it can. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, holds that it cannot. The sages taught in Braita, one who pours a libation, 3 log of wine outside the courtyard is liable. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, says, and that is in a case where he first consecrated the wine in a sacred service vessel. What is the difference between them? Rabbi Ada bar Rav Yitzchak said, the difference between them is with regard to whether the overfill of measuring vessels is also consecrated. Both agree that one is liable for pouring a libation outside the courtyard only if it was first consecrated in a service vessel. The first Tana holds that the liquid that rises above the rim of a vessel is also consecrated, and if only one collects 3 log of that liquid and pours it as a libation outside the courtyard, he is liable. Rabbi Elazar, son of Rabbi Shimon, holds that only the wine within the walls of the vessel itself is consecrated. Rava berei de Rabba. Wow, Rava the son of Rabba? I didn't know that Rava had a son named Rava. Where do we have this? Rava berei de Rabba. Interesting. What's the gematria of that? Rava berei de Rabba is equal to 631. Oh my goodness. I just did a pi video on number 631. 631 is the 314th triplicate, the 314th. Let's put it this way. If you count the 314 digits of pi, within those 3, you'll see 631. It'll either be 3 or 1. This is amazing. Zevachim went in. I got to mark this one down. This is amazing. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Rava, the son of Rabba, said, the difference between them is with regard to whether one is liable for pouring a libation outside the courtyard that was not first consecrated in a service vessel. The dispute is based on a disagreement as to whether wine libations were offered on private altars. He explains, and they disagree with regard to the issue that is the subject of the dispute between the Tanaim, as it is taught in the Braita. An offering sacrificed on a private altar does not need to be accompanied by wine libations. This is a statement of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And the rabbis say it does require wine libations. Service vessels are not used in the context of private altars. Therefore, if libations are brought on private altars, then it is apparent that libations can be valid, even if they were not first consecrated in a service vessel. Accordingly, one would be liable for pouring libation outside the temple, even if it had not been first consecrated in a service vessel. If libations are not brought on private altars, then there is no precedent of a libation that was not first consecrated in a service vessel, and one would not be liable for pouring non-consecrated libation outside the temple. And the opinion of these Tanaim is like the opinion of those Tanaim, as it is taught in a Braita. In introducing the mitzvah to bring wine and libation together with animal offerings, the verse states, "When you come into the land of your dwellings, which I give to you," Numbers 15, verse 2. Which indicates that the mitzvah to bring libations began only once the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael. The verse speaks in order to require that libations be brought with animal offerings that are brought upon a great public altar. This assumes libations were not brought on a public altar in the wilderness. Therefore, it is necessary to teach that upon entering Eretz Yisrael, they are required. אתה אומר לבבא גדולה, אין אפילו בבא קטנה, כשהוא אומר, אל ארץ מושבותיכם אשר אני נותן לכם. הרי במה הנוהגת לכולכם, הכתוב מדבר דברי רבי ישמעאל. Do you say that the verse is referring to offerings brought on a great public altar, or is it even referring to offerings brought on a small private altar? Perhaps libations were brought on the public altar in the wilderness, and it is therefore necessary to state that after entering Eretz Yisrael, libations should continue to be brought on the public altar. Accordingly, the verse must be teaching that after the Jewish people have entered Eretz Yisrael, libations are required even on private altars. This suggestion is rejected when the verse states, "Into the land of your dwellings, which I give to you, lachem," using the plural form of the word you. It is apparent that the verse is speaking of a public altar that is used by everyone. This is the statement of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Ki tavou lati'ina nesachim v'vama levama ketana hakaz medaber. Rabbi Kiva says, through its introductory clause, when you come, the verse speaks in order to require that libations be brought with animal offerings that are brought upon a small private altar. This assumes libations that were already brought in the wilderness, and the verse must be teaching that libations are required even on private altars. Do you say that the verse is speaking of a small private altar outside the temple, or is it simply referring to a great public altar? Perhaps libations were not brought on the public altar in the wilderness, and the verse is necessary in order to teach that upon entering Eretz Yisrael, they are required. When the verse states, "Into the land of your dwellings," it is apparent that the verse is speaking of an altar that is used in all your dwellings, which certainly must be referring to private altars, as there was only one central public altar. The Gemara explains, when you analyze the matter, you will find that you can say that according to the statement of Rabbi Yishmael, libations were not offered in the wilderness. Therefore, it is necessary to teach that upon entering Eretz Yisrael, they are required, and according to the statement of Rabbi Akiva, libations were offered in the wilderness. Therefore, the verse must be teaching that libations are required even on private altars. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, the Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Nechemia says, for the remainder of the blood of an offering that was supposed to be poured at the base of the altar, and then instead one sacrificed outside the altar was liable. Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Nechemia taught this halacha in accordance with the statement of the one who says that failure to pour the remainder of the blood at the base of the altar disqualifies the offering. Meisvei, I will ask you a question. Rabbi Nechemia Omer, Sheri Adam Shekriv Mechutz Chayav, Amar lo Rabbi Kiva, Ve'lo Sheri Adam Sheri Mitzvahim, Amru lo Evarin Ubidarin Yochichum, Shehen Sheri Mitzvah Ve'kriv Mechutz Chayav, Amar lo. אם אמרת באיברים ובדרים שהן תחילת עבודה, תאמר בשיר אדם שאינן תחילה עבודה. The Gemara raises an objection from a bright top. Rabbi Nechemia says that for the remainder of the blood of an offering that one sacrificed outside the courtyard, one is liable. Rabbi Akiva said to him, isn't pouring the remainder of the blood considered a non-essential mitzvah, which is not indispensable to the validity of the offering? Accordingly, one should not be liable for sacrificing the blood outside the temple courtyard. Rabbi Nechemia said to him, sacrificial limbs and fats of a burnt offering will prove the matter, as they are considered a non-essential mitzvah, and yet one who sacrifices them outside the courtyard is liable. Rabbi Akiva said to him, no. If you said that one is liable with regard to the burning of the limbs and fats, which is the start of a sacrificial rite, meaning burning them as a sacrificial rite in and of itself, shall you also say that this is the halakha with regard to the pouring of the remainder of the blood, which is not the start of a sacrificial rite, but is just the conclusion of the sprinkling of the blood? The Gemara explains the challenge from a Braita, and if it is so that Rabbi Nechemia holds that the failure to pour the remainder of the blood at the base of the altar disqualifies the offering, let Rabbi Nechemia say, in response to Rabbi Akiva, these two, meaning the pouring of the remainder of the blood, are considered to be a sacrificial rite in and of themselves because failure to pour out the remainder disqualifies the offering. The Gemara concludes, indeed, this is a conclusive refutation. והשני אמר רבא דבר אהבה מחלוקת בשיריים הפנימיים אבל שיריים חיצוניים דבי הכל ויאג הגיע רבי נחמיה בשיריים פנימיים כתניא היא בשיריים החיצוניים. The Gemara qualifies its rejection. And now the Rabbi Ada bar Ahava says the dispute between the Tanaim with regard to whether failure to pour the remainder of the blood disqualifies the offering is only with regard to the remainder of the blood that was presented on the inner altar. But with regard to the remainder of the blood that was presented to the external altar, everyone agrees that failure to pour it does not disqualify the offering. The apparent contradiction between Rabbi Yochanan's statement and the Braita can therefore be resolved. When Rabbi Nechemia says in the Mishnah that one is liable for sacrificing the remainder of the blood outside the courtyard, he is referring to the remainder of the blood that was presented in the inner altar. The pouring of that blood is considered a rite in and of itself. In and of itself. And one is liable for sacrificing it outside the temple. When that statement Rabbi Nechemia is taught in the Braita is referring to the remainder of the blood that was presented on the external altar. Concerning such blood, Rabbi Nechemia concedes that the pouring is not considered a rite in and of itself. But Rabbi Akiva lo yada my kama Rabbi Nechemia. Hosavar Rabbi Nechemia shirayim chitzonim amam. V'kama le shirayim chitzonim Rabbi Nechemia nuvav v'nei v'kama. In light of this, the Gemara explains the discussion between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Nechemia. Rabbi Akiva did not know what Rabbi Nechemia was saying. Rabbi Akiva thought that Rabbi Nechemia was stating a ruling about the pouring of the remainder of the blood that was presented on the external altar. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva responded to him with a claim relating to the remainder of the blood, from a remainder of blood that was presented on the external altar, and said that this is a non-essential mitzvah. And then Rabbi Nechemia answered him by saying a defense of his opinion in accordance with the misconception underlying the statement of Rabbi Akiva. That concludes the Talmud for this Mishnah, and now we start a new Mishnah. Zog the Heilige Mishnah, Hamaylik is alive b'fnim mele b'chutz chayav, malak b'chutz mele b'chutz batzum, Ashoich is alive b'fnim mele b'chutz batzum. Shachad, turning on to letter B now, Shachad b'chutz, v'hen b'chutz chayav. Okay, we'll pick it up, starting in the Mishnah with the next daf, with the next amud. Oh, I'll read that right, the English. The Mishnah says, one who pinches the nape of a bird offering inside the temple courtyard and then offers it up outside the courtyard is liable. But if one pinched its nape outside the courtyard and then offered it up outside the courtyard, he is exempt, as pinching the nape of a bird outside the courtyard is not considered a valid pinching. One who slaughters with a knife a bird offering inside the courtyard and offers it up inside the courtyard is exempt, as slaughtering a bird offering in the temple courtyard disqualifies it as an offering. But if one slaughtered a bird, 111b, but if one slaughtered a bird offering outside the courtyard and then offered it up outside the courtyard, he is liable. I don't know why. It says pinching is an essential part of it, but that's what it says.